I'm going to talk about how within the Endangered Landscapes and Seascapes Programme, we've been working with the projects that we support to embed evidence checking and testing in their work. And I'm particularly going to focus on how funders can play a role in supporting evidence-based practice and experiences we've gained from working with our grantees over the past 7 years. So a quick introduction to the programme. We got underway in 2018 with the aim of restoring biodiversity and natural processes at scale across Europe. And the kind of USP of the programme is that we support projects working over large spatial scales with the aim of restoring ecosystem function and creating resilient and self-sustaining landscapes. We absolutely recognise that people are fundamental to the success of these projects. So it's really important that the people who are living in, working in, spending time in these landscapes are part of and benefiting from the recovery of nature. How we achieve this is by providing grants. We provide large grants of up to $5 million over 5 years. And all this is only possible due to the generosity of our funder, Arcadia. We set up our first round of grants in 2018, and since then we've had 3 more funding rounds. This is a map showing the distribution of projects that we have supported so far. So that's 21 landscapes in green and seascapes in blue. You can see there's a broad geographical spread. So we've got projects working on restoring peatlands and native forests in the Highlands of Scotland. We've got a project over in the east in Georgia, restoring dry steppe grassland. On the marine side, for example, we've got a project in Turkey on the Mediterranean coast, which is trying to restore marine trophic chains and working with fishers to develop sustainable livelihoods. And we've got 8 new projects starting this year, which is very exciting. So these are all big, complicated projects. They've got lots of different stakeholders working across mosaics of habitats. So it's really important that any of the processes we have as a programme are really appropriate to this diversity of contexts. Oh, that's not what it looks like on my screen. Okay, there's quite a lot. There's a nice picture and some more text. But anyway, so we heard this morning about how important it is that projects and organisations are considering the evidence when they are making plans and making decisions. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how this works in practice. It look like this. Oh, okay. Yeah, how this works in practice, and yeah, how funders can really play a role in this. And really, yeah, talk about our experiences from those 20 projects that we've worked with and what we've learned from them as well. So for the first couple of grant calls, we had a section in our application process which simply asked projects to describe the evidence they use to select their interventions and the design of interventions. And understandably, projects responded in a really variable way to this. So some would write a paragraph, some would write 5 pages. So in later grant calls, we've moved to a much more structured way of doing this. So we now provide a template table. And I think the applicants say it's actually quite helpful for them to understand what kind of thing we're expecting. And for us, it's definitely helpful to have a more consistent and systematic approach to this section. So what we want our applicants to think about, and we ask them to structure it around, is the assumptions in their theory of change, and to pick out a couple of key assumptions that can be social or that could be ecological, and to describe the evidence that's led to them thinking that's going to happen. And of course, we emphasize that evidence isn't just traditional published scientific literature, it's also their personal experiences, grey literature, local and indigenous knowledge, and expert opinion. And we're really super aware that a lot of our projects are working in geographies with species and in contexts where there's little or even sometimes no evidence. So we really reinforce that if there's no evidence, particularly published scientific evidence to support an intervention, that should not be a barrier to undertaking it. Really what we're trying to do is avoid projects doing things that have been shown not to work or where there may be a better option available. And I like to really think about this as making decision-making more transparent and more rigorous, rather than marking their homework on how much evidence there is behind their, oh, this one's worked good, behind their decisions. So another thing we think about quite a lot is when should projects be looking at evidence? And we've heard this morning a lot of people saying all the time, and I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But for us, we have a 3-stage application process, which is maybe quite unusual. So we have a really short expression of interest that is open to everybody. We then have a longer 2nd-stage application. And then we have this 3rd stage where projects that get to the 3rd stage have been given in principle approval. And then they have a few months and actually a funding grant as well, where we ask them to really develop their full documentation for their project. And the aim is to make things as efficient as possible for applicants and to reduce the burden on unsuccessful applicants. And it's at this 3rd stage we ask about the evidence base. And there are some really nice things about working at this 3rd stage because it's no longer competitive. We can have conversations with the projects. They can ask us questions. In terms of the evidence base, we hold a webinar, and Conservation Evidence have helped us deliver this, where we talk to them about why evidence is important, what it is, how they should assess it. I guess there is one possible risk, I think, that we're aware of with having this evidence-based section at the later stage of the proposal, which is it becomes a sort of post hoc exercise in them finding evidence to confirm what they've already decided. So we are thinking about moving it to an earlier stage of the proposal, or perhaps just really telling them to check the evidence at the beginning, even if they don't have to demonstrate it to us then. Moving to some other experiences, in terms of our applicants, this is just a little snapshot from a survey we carried out from our most recent applicants who'd gone through the proposal development process. And it was encouraging to see that 11 out of 12 of the projects that responded to this survey found the evidence-based section useful. However, I think there are still things to think about. I think what I really realized is that projects are making decisions all the time, all different kinds of level of decision at different stages in the project cycle. So for example, there will be an initial decision to apply for a project. It might be, we're going to restore that woodland. And that's probably not primarily driven by evidence, but it's things like, how are we going to restore it? Are we going to use planting or natural regeneration? Where are we going to source the materials? When are we going to plant the trees? All those kinds of questions are the ones where evidence could be really useful. And I don't think for us as funders, we can or would want to be involved in all those decisions that our projects are taking. We want to trust them, they know their context, and let them get on with it. So I think what I see this evidence-based section during the proposal as doing is asking them to look at the evidence at that point with the hope that they will then see the value in continuing to do that and embedding it in their processes going forward. So shifting organisations to a culture where evidence is routinely checked when decisions are being made. So moving on to generating new evidence and thinking about how funders can support testing to build the evidence base in the projects they support. So, as we, I think, all know, there is a scarcity of evidence for a lot of conservation actions across different contexts, across different species. And I think that embedding experiments into practice is a huge opportunity to scale up evidence generation. If only a small proportion of conservation actions that are taking place could also contain a test, then we could massively increase the amount of evidence that's being generated. A study by Paul Tinsley Marshall and others showed that both funders and practitioners were supportive of a shift towards this. And I think the ELSP has been quite a pioneer in this. So since the start of the programme, we have asked all the projects that we fund to include at least one test of a conservation intervention. Again, we do this at the 3rd stage of proposal development. And for us, I think that works really nicely for the testing stage. for a lot of the organizations we fund, testing is new and it's not necessarily easy. So it's great that at this stage we can have conversations with them, help them refine the question they want to test and the design of their experiments. And just a note on nomenclature here, we actually call our tests restoration trials, and that's in response to a suggestion by one of our grantee practitioners who said that it really better reflected the fact it was a really practical experiment that was really embedded into ongoing management. So yeah, we have a section in our third stage of proposal development with a bunch of questions about how they're going to do the trial. And I just pulled out a couple of the key ones. So getting them to be really specific about what question they are testing, getting them to really think about experimental design, how they're going to use replication and controls to really tease out cause and effect, what data they're going to collect and how they're going to analyze it. And yeah, really importantly, thinking about how knowing the answer to this test is going to make a difference, either to their project or to the wider restoration community. So I just popped in an example here, going up to the Highlands of Scotland and the Cairngorms Connect project. One of the things this project's trying to do is increase the structural diversity and species composition of old plantation forests. So the question they chose to address is, how do different methods of creating deadwood affect invertebrate communities? And they carried out a really nice replicated controlled trial of 3 different methods. So ring barking, winching, which is pulling trees over, and more traditional felling, and looked at the impact on the deadwood insect communities. And really excitingly, after 2 years, they have seen differences in the communities between the treatments. And I think it will be really interesting to follow the progress of that experiment over longer time periods, because I think, yeah, those communities will evolve as the wood starts to decompose. So again, we've had those 20 odd projects go through this process. So what have we learned from them? I mentioned that it's a new idea for a lot of organizations and that it's helpful to have support. And I think that particularly comes in terms of identifying suitable questions for testing. A lot of them will come in, and if you ask them for an idea of something they'd like to know about, they will say something like removing a dam or restoring a peatland. And I think that more often works well as monitoring and getting them to think on whether there are more specific single interventions that they can test by replicating, and having a comparison tends to be more informative. As part of this, I would say it's really nice to have that stage 3 process when we have a couple of months with the projects, because it can take time and quite a few conversations to come up with useful tests. So we might talk to them, they'll go off and talk to their partners and internally and come back with new ideas. And so we kind of refine the ideas through that process. And I think they often get really excited when we suggest considering a social intervention to test as well as an ecological one. As we all know, there's lots of social interventions as part of conservation and restoration projects, and very little evidence for a lot of them. And we've had a couple of really nice social tests as part of the programme, so definitely worth thinking about. Flexibility is really important. I think we've heard it a few times today, but not all projects are in the end suitable for including a test. And so we do absolutely waive that requirement. We don't want to shoehorn tests into projects that aren't suitable, maybe one that's working on policy or other really high-level topics. Having said that, some of our projects really get excited about this opportunity and run with it, and we have other projects that are doing 4 or 5 small tests as part of their grants. I think it's really important to think about writing up, not just writing up analysis, writing up and sharing results. And all these are really key parts of testing, and they require time and they require expertise, which practitioners are often struggling for. So we really try to support them through that process, to think about it from the beginning, but also when they're doing it. Because it's really sad to see projects stop at that stage, and I think it's probably quite common. And then the final thing I've got here is timescales, which I think is probably the biggest challenge for all our science across the programme, is just that ecological and social change is often quite slow and grant periods are really short. So we are thinking about mechanisms to support data collection beyond the main grant period. So that's me. Thank you very much.